In this video, we're going to be weaving a mug rug, so let's get started. We're going to be weaving a striped mug rug, but I wanted to do a color palette that I haven't really done before. So we're going to be using dark green 8/8 cotton, and I have this beautiful Briggs & Little heritage yarn. This is a completely Canadian made yarn, and I love it. And I'm going to be using this dark green that kind of goes with my warp string, this reddish tone, and the pink tone. So I will list all of these out in the description below, and you might just find that your local yarn store may carry this yarn, but there's lots of places you can grab it online as well. If you're a complete beginner and are looking for more of a beginner-friendly version of this, I'm gonna link a video right here. This is for a little bookmark, but it's going to be done very similarly to this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm taking our Spruce and Linen recycled acrylic mini loom, and I'm going to be double warping the entire loom. So I'm gonna warp all the way across. So when I say double warp, I just mean to put 2 strings in each of the notches. This gives us a nice full warp, and I'm using 8/8 cotton because it is a thicker warp string, and that's going to give us a nice full fringe for this little mug rug. Now, the one thing you want to make sure is that you start and stop on the same end of your loom for this, because we want to have our warp in groups of 2. So I have a total of 32 warp strings on the loom, which means I have 16 groups of 2. Next, I'm leaving myself a long tail, and I'm going to tie this end of the warp onto the loom. So next, since I like weaving on the flat, I'm going to be taping down my loom to the table so it doesn't shift around, just using some painter's tape. This is just the best option I've found to not wreck your surface. So I have this little piece of cardstock that I've been using for these mug rugs on this loom for so long. It's just a little folded piece of cardstock, and it's 1.25 inches tall, and I find it just works really well for this. I am going to be weaving this in over 2 under 2. So it's basically plain weave, but you're going over and under 2 strings at a time instead of only 1. Next, I'm grabbing my green. Now, I did want to do my stripes in a different order, but let's just talk about why I changed my mind. I'm gonna bring out a couple examples just because I like to sometimes, I always like to give you guys sort of a why this decision is being made so that it makes sense hopefully to you in the projects that you're doing as well. So I wanted to do this project, the color orders to be in, I have these little sample pieces that I made of these yarns. I wanted to go in this order, so the light pink, the reddish pink, and then the green, but I realized why that wasn't a good idea, and it's because of this. So you see how at the beginning of this, I did my twining stitch and plain weave to secure the ends of my mug rug. And because I used white with a green fringe, so I have used this green fringe before, I stand corrected. What I don't like is the fact that the green really peeks through all of this. Now, the rest of the mug rug is going to be weaving over 2 under 2, which will cover up those warp strings. But at the beginning, I really like to do it this way because it secures everything in much better. So on this one, you can see the difference. So because I used an off-white warp string with an off-white yarn for this base work, you can barely see the difference here. It doesn't stand out anymore. So you can kind of just look at those ends and see the difference, that to me, this one looks much more clean and professional. And this one, while I still like it, it's just not, because it's not really part of this beautiful design that I have going on here, I feel that it stands out in a way that I'm not a huge fan of. So that's my why. I'm going to grab a few arm's lengths of this yarn. I know everyone wants exact measurements of yarn, but I don't really work that way with frame loom weaving because I find that it's a little tricky to calculate basically, so I just don't. Now, I'm going to get myself, I'm gonna do 3 arm's lengths. So the reason why I like to do 3 arm's lengths typically is just because I find that it's an amount that isn't too frustrating to work with. Like, it's not too long, but it's not so short that you're gonna have many ends to tuck in at the end. Next, I'm going to grab one of my tapestry needles, and I'm going to be doing all the base work first. So you can see this color isn't an exact match, but I do think that it's going to blend in so much better than if I were to start with this light pink like I had originally planned to. So I'm gonna go ahead and do over 1 under 1 plain weave, with a twining stitch over top of that, and then 2 more rows of that type of plain weave before we start going over to under 2. Something I like about mug rugs is they feel like a very giftable form of weaving, and I think it could be really nice to do a mug rug, maybe with a mug that you find at a store or a homemade mug, and some hot chocolate or coffee or tea, and that would make just such a sweet little mini gift basket. And now I'm moving on to our over to under 2 plain weave. So this is going to give the mug rug a little bit more of a tapestry feel, in the sense that you won't see the warp strings at all. So very similar to this one, all those warp strings will be covered, and I will link the video for this mug rug right here. So we're going to have 1 inch of green, 1 inch of the dark reddish pink mauve color. I don't know what to call it. And then we're going to do a 3/4 inch stripe in the middle that is the light pink. I'm really going to pay close attention to the sides of my mug rug, doing my best not to have them drawing in a bunch, but also that the yarn isn't loose around the edges either. So I'm going to keep kind of checking in on those edges. The other thing that helps with this, of course, is our arch. So you'll see me do this throughout this piece. An arch, maybe a little strum, and then beat down the weft. Okay, so I'm at 1 inch there. So what I'm going to do to end this, so you'll see that I ended going under these 2 warp strings. So what I like to do when that's the case, just to make the edges a little bit more tidy, I'm going to lift this up and I'm going to loop my yarn back around those 2 warp strings. And then that just gives it a tidier edge. Then I'm going to leave a nice long tail, and that can be tucked in later. So I used about 2 arms lengths. So now I know that going into the next section, so I'm probably going to only grab 2 of the next color. So I'm going to be using this red heather color, and I'm going to start weaving the next row. So just like the green, I'm going over to under 2. This is going to make it so the color of the weft really shines and not the warp strings. We're covering all of those up. All right, so now I have woven 1 inch of the red color. So I'm going to move on to the next color. So I'm ending this on this side of the loom instead of this one, since I had these ends here. I always like to kind of try to spread out where the ends are ending, so that they're not all just clumped to one side. So just like before, I'm going to lift this up and do another loop around this edge for a cleaner finish, leave a tail, and now I can move on to the pink. So for the pink, because again, I didn't use even 2 arms lengths for that last section. So for this one, I'm definitely gonna go with like 1.5 arms. And I'm gonna start on this edge, and this stripe is only gonna be 3/4 of an inch wide. So we're just kind of adding some variation, but I also wanted this to end up being about 4 3/4 because my reference one was about that. So I think that it's just a good way to do it, is to use a previous one to dictate the size of this one. So now that I'm done with the light pink, I'm finishing it off the same way I've done all the other ends, and I'm gonna go back to the red heather color. So this is going to be a symmetrical little mug rug, and I'm gonna weave 1 inch of the red next. Now that I'm done the second section of the heather red, I'm going to move back to the dark green. So I'm going to be doing the same amount of rows I did down here, which for me was 15 rows of the green, and then my plain weave twining to finish it off. So what I'm gonna do to do my twining stitch, I'm gonna leave a nice long tail, and then I'm gonna go back to this other side and do my twining stitch from this way. When you turn around your twining stitch using the same piece of yarn, it's going to pull this in if you're tightening it enough. And we need this twining stitch nice and tight in order for it to secure the warp strings. So just a tip there to not turn around and do your twining stitch, grab a new piece, or use, in my case, the end of the previous piece, and do your twining stitch with that. So now I'm just doing another quick measurement to make sure that I finished this off with that green being 1 inch like I wanted it to. Now I'm ready to do all the finishing on this mug rug, and the first step is to tuck in all the ends. So now I'm ready to get this off the loom, so I'm removing my cardstock and I'm going to just be cutting this off of the loom. I'm thinking what I'm gonna do is actually use this other coaster for a template of where I want to cut my fringe. So I'm gonna line up those twining stitches on both mug rugs. And it looks like what I probably did for this first one was mostly just line up my scissors with this edge of my loom. I can almost guarantee that that's what I did. Now, the other thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to hold my hand down. Now, since I know that's what's happening, I'm gonna hold my hand down here just to keep the pressure on it so it doesn't go all wonky as I cut. Then I'm gonna turn this around. I'm not gonna take it off the loom. I'm gonna turn this around, and here's where I can use this as a template for that cut. So now that I have that cut, I'm gonna take all these little ends off. And then what I'm going to do is actually brush out the fringe. So to do that, I'm using a little rope brush. This one is from Unfettered Co. And I'm gonna grab a piece of cardstock to just not scratch up my table, because these are this is very, honestly, I think this is exactly the same as a cat brush. It's just much cuter. So it's very pokey, like they're little wires for the bristles. So I'm just gonna go ahead and carefully comb out the fringe. I like to go from both sides because it just works better and it helps it get really combed out. And I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so now that I've combed it out, I'm gonna go ahead and even out this line. So you can see that it wasn't quite perfect. So then that's where I can kind of just trim it ever so slightly. And then I like to go along the whole edge, because what you'll notice, maybe you can see it, maybe you can't, but when you comb it out, there's a little bit of cotton fluff that kind of gets pulled out as well. So I like to go ahead and trim that off as well, just to keep it a little bit neater. This one you can see a little bit more, there's quite a bit of fluff happening. Now let's make sure that the fringe is the same length, and it actually looks really good. And now we're ready to look at the finished coaster. I love the way that this little mug rug turned out, and if you enjoyed this video, check out our full mug rug playlist here.